Stay away. That was the phrase people would later swear they heard. Quietly, not shouted, not dramatic, but firm enough to cut through the hum of the Sundance Film Festival like a blade through silk. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Stay away. And the unsettling part? It wasn't said to a stranger. It wasn't said to a paparazzo. It wasn't said to a fan. It was allegedly said to Meghan Markle. Now pause for a second. Let that land. Because if even half of what witnesses claim is true, then what unfolded at the 2026 Sundance Film Festival wasn't just awkward. It wasn't just uncomfortable. It was revealing in a way no red carpet interview, no documentary premiere, no carefully curated public appearance could ever be. Ask yourself this. What makes someone with global name recognition, a powerful title, and a professional PR machine behind them continue asking for the same thing for nearly 2 hours after being refused? That's the question that froze more than a few seasoned Sundance insiders in place. This story doesn't begin with shouting. It doesn't begin with security stepping in. It doesn't even begin with confrontation. It begins with persistence. The kind that makes people shift their weight from one foot to the other. The kind that turns polite smiles into tight ones. The kind that makes observers quietly glance at each other and think, something is off here. Sundance 2026 was supposed to be a reset. That was the word floating through industry conversations weeks before the festival even began. A reset. A recalibration. A new chapter. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle arrived in Utah to celebrate the premiere of their documentary, Cookie Queens, framed publicly as a feel-good, values-driven project spotlighting women-led entrepreneurship, community resilience, and reinvention. The optics were intentional, warm, purposeful, safe. The kind of project designed to soften edges and invite goodwill. And on the surface, it worked. They smiled. They posed. They greeted familiar faces. They laughed at the right moments. But Sundance isn't Cannes, and it isn't Hollywood. Sundance is quieter, sharper, more observant. Here, people don't always announce their power. They just have it. And that's where Amy Redford enters the story. Not with an announcement, not with a spotlight, but with presence. If you weren't paying attention, you might have missed her entirely. No entourage theatrics. No performative gestures. No need to command the room. She didn't have to. And according to multiple eyewitness accounts, Meghan noticed her almost immediately. That's where the tension begins. Because the first approach was normal. Innocent, even. A greeting. A smile. An introduction. That part didn't raise eyebrows. What raised eyebrows was what came after. Observers claim Meghan asked for Amy's contact information, a phone number, a way to connect later. Again, not unusual in itself. Sundance is a networking environment. People exchange contacts constantly. But when the answer came back, no, something shifted. It wasn't rude. It wasn't dramatic. It was allegedly polite, restrained, and unmistakably firm. No. And then it happened again, and again, and again. Different phrasing. Same request. People nearby began to notice the pattern, not because voices were raised, but because time was passing. Conversations flowed around them. People arrived and left. Drinks were refilled. Events moved forward. And still, the interaction continued. Here's where things get uncomfortable. Because according to those who say they were close enough to observe without eavesdropping, this wasn't a back-and-forth conversation anymore. It was one-sided. Meghan leaning in. Amy stepping back, subtly, physically, socially. Meghan smiling. Amy maintaining composure. And each refusal, delivered calmly, seemed to land harder than the last. Ask yourself, at what point does persistence stop being confidence and start becoming pressure? That question rippled through the room long before anyone dared say it out loud. Some witnesses claimed the requests weren't constant in a frantic sense, but repeated over time. Moments of pause. Moments of regrouping. Moments where Meghan allegedly returned to the same ask, as if a different tone, a different framing, a different emotional appeal might finally unlock a yes. 2 hours. Let that sink in again. 2 hours of intermittent asking. 2 hours of being told no. 2 hours of trying anyway. And here's the part that made seasoned Sundance attendees deeply uneasy. Amy Redford didn't escalate. She didn't confront. She didn't make a scene. She simply didn't give in. That kind of refusal carries weight in spaces like Sundance. Because it's not about status. It's about boundaries. And boundaries, when enforced quietly, tend to expose more than confrontations ever do. Now, why does this matter? Why does one alleged interaction between two women at a film festival deserve this level of scrutiny? Because of what it symbolizes. Because in Hollywood, and especially in Sundance culture, access is currency. Not fame, not titles, not headlines. Access. And Amy Redford represents something Meghan has been accused by critics of chasing, but never quite securing: unforced legitimacy. This is where the story deepens. Cookie Queens was positioned as a return to authenticity. Grassroots narratives. Community focus. Less spectacle, more substance. Yet according to insiders, behind the scenes there was anxiety. Questions. Quiet skepticism. Was this project about storytelling or repositioning? Was Sundance chosen because it was the right fit, or because it was the last remaining gate that still held cultural credibility? No one says these things publicly, but people think them. And when Meghan allegedly continued asking Amy Redford for contact information, some interpreted it not as networking, but as urgency. Urgency makes people nervous, especially in a space that values restraint. At some point during the exchange, witnesses claim Prince Harry noticed. Not dramatically, not angrily, but enough to suggest concern. Some say he tried to redirect attention. Others say he hovered nearby, unsure whether to intervene. No one claims he confronted anyone. But several observers noted a visible shift in his demeanor. Less relaxed, more alert. Because moments like this don't just reflect on one person. They echo. By the end of the evening, whispers had already begun. Not gossip. Assessment. People asking each other quiet questions. Did you see that? How long was that going on? Why wouldn't she take no for an answer? And then came the detail that made the story spread faster. According to multiple accounts, Amy Redford allegedly ended the interaction with a sentence so measured, so final, that it closed the door completely. Not loudly, not publicly, but decisively. That sentence hasn't been officially confirmed. It wasn't recorded. It wasn't tweeted. But those who claim to have heard it describe the same effect. Silence. The kind that tells you the conversation is over. The kind that tells you something unspoken has been understood. And suddenly, Meghan wasn't just another filmmaker at Sundance. She was the center of a moment people couldn't unsee. This introduction isn't about villainizing anyone. It's about examining what happens when worlds collide. Royal branding meets indie culture. Persistence meets principle. Expectation meets refusal. And if you think this ends here, at an awkward exchange and a quiet rejection, you're wrong. Because what happened next didn't just stay in that room. It traveled. It mutated. It revealed fractures people had been pretending didn't exist. And the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes that this wasn't about a phone number at all. It was about power. And power, when it's denied, has a way of showing its true face. But what came next would change how people at Sundance viewed Meghan Markle entirely, and no one saw it coming. People like to say Sundance is relaxed, casual, friendly, less rigid than Cannes or Venice, less ruthless than Hollywood proper. That's only half true. Sundance is relaxed on the surface, but underneath, it is one of the most observant spaces in the industry. People watch everything, not out of malice, but out of instinct. Careers have been shaped here by things far smaller than what happened that night. And that's what makes this moment so unsettling. Because plenty of people saw it. They just didn't react the way you'd expect. No gasps. No phones lifted dramatically into the air. No whispered, "Oh my God," loud enough to be overheard. Instead, there was something worse. Silence. The kind of silence that signals shared discomfort. The kind that spreads not because people want to gossip, but because they're unsure whether what they're witnessing is appropriate to acknowledge at all. It happened in a semi-private space, not hidden, but not fully public either. One of those Sundance environments that feels informal, but isn't. A place where conversations overlap, where reputations are quietly weighed, where tone matters as much as words. At first, nothing about the scene seemed noteworthy. Meghan Markle approached Amy Redford the way dozens of people approached dozens of people that night. A smile. Eye contact. A polite opening line. Normal. Expected. Almost invisible in the larger flow of the evening. Observers say Amy responded courteously. Calm. Neutral. Engaged just enough to be respectful. This is important. Because early on, there was no tension. No friction. Nothing anyone could point to and say, that's where it went wrong. The first request came naturally. According to those nearby, Meghan asked if they could stay in touch. A phone number. A way to connect later. In another context, this wouldn't even register as a moment worth remembering. But Amy Redford said no. Not harshly. Not dismissively. Just no. And here's where things subtly shifted. Most people, when told no in these settings, adjust immediately. They pivot. They smile, wrap up the exchange, move on. That's the unspoken etiquette of elite professional spaces. But Meghan didn't pivot. She stayed. Not awkwardly at first. Not obviously. Just present. Observers say there was a pause. A recalibration. Meghan nodded, smiled again, said something else. The conversation continued. Minutes passed. Other people drifted in and out of the space. Conversations overlapped. Drinks were exchanged. Laughter rose and fell. And then Meghan asked again. This time, the phrasing was different. More conversational. More personal. Less transactional. Still, the answer was the same. No. This is where people began to notice. Not because it was dramatic, but because repetition changes meaning. What feels like confidence the first time can feel like pressure the third. Amy Redford's demeanor, by all accounts, remained steady. She didn't appear flustered. She didn't appear annoyed. But she did something subtle that seasoned observers immediately clocked. She didn't lean in. She didn't mirror Meghan's body language. She created space. Not obvious space. Not confrontational space. But just enough to signal a boundary. Meghan, according to witnesses, did not mirror that cue. She stayed close. She stayed engaged. And at Sundance, proximity is communication. People nearby began to glance over more often. Not openly staring, but checking. Rechecking. Something about the interaction wasn't resolving the way interactions usually do. Here's the part no one likes to talk about. Time. Time is the thing that transforms a normal exchange into an uncomfortable one. 5 minutes becomes 10. 10 becomes 20. Conversations around them turn over completely. New faces appear. Old ones leave. And still, the interaction continues. At some point, observers claim Meghan tried humor. A light comment. A small laugh. The kind of thing designed to soften resistance. Amy smiled politely and said no. Again, it's important to understand what that means in this environment. Sundance culture is built on consent and collaboration. No one forces access. No one demands it. You're either invited into someone's circle or you're not. And when someone says no multiple times, the expectation is that the request stops. But it didn't. Witnesses say Meghan tried reframing the request. Not asking directly for a number this time, but suggesting a future conversation. A follow-up. A casual check-in later. Amy declined again. Still polite. Still calm. Still unmistakable. And this is where the discomfort shifted from curiosity to concern. Because repetition strips away ambiguity. By now, people weren't wondering whether Amy understood the request. She did. They weren't wondering whether Meghan had been heard. She had. So the question quietly formed in the room. Why continue? Some observers describe Meghan's demeanor as focused, determined. Others use words like intent or insistent. No one claims she raised her voice. No one claims she caused a scene. That's almost what makes it worse. Because everything happened under a veneer of civility. And civility can conceal a lot. About 30 minutes in, by conservative estimates, the interaction still hadn't ended. People who had initially brushed it off now found themselves checking their watches. Mentally noting how long the two women had been standing in roughly the same positions. One insider later described it like this. It felt like watching someone knock on a door that had already been closed, hoping persistence might magically turn the handle. But doors at Sundance don't work like that. At some point, Prince Harry entered the periphery, not dramatically, not as an intervention, but present enough to be noticed by those already watching. Witnesses say he looked over more than once. That his posture shifted, that his expression changed, subtly, but noticeably. Less relaxed, more alert. It's impossible to say what he was thinking. No one claims to know. But the moment his presence became part of the tableau, the stakes rose. Because now this wasn't just a one-on-one interaction. It was a public dynamic. And public dynamics have consequences. Meghan, according to observers, didn't acknowledge the shift. She remained focused on Amy. The ask came again. This time, some say, it sounded almost logistical. as if trying to remove emotion from the equation entirely. Still no. Amy's responses, "Witnesses insist," never changed in tone. That consistency is what many found striking. She didn't escalate because she didn't need to. She held the boundary without explanation. And that, in spaces like this, is power. An hour passed. That's not a typo. An hour. Some observers drifted away out of discomfort. Others stayed because they couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. This wasn't confrontation. This wasn't drama. This was endurance. Two people standing in different worlds, operating under different assumptions about how access works. And slowly, the imbalance became impossible to ignore. Meghan was the one still asking. Amy was the one still refusing. And the longer it went on, the clearer it became that the refusal wasn't situational. It was philosophical. By the time the interaction finally ended, nearly 2 hours after it began, the atmosphere around it had changed completely. People weren't whispering anymore. They were exchanging looks. The kind that say, "Did that really just happen?" And then came the moment that sealed it. According to multiple accounts, Amy Redford ended the exchange with a sentence so calm, so measured, that it left no room for interpretation. No raised voice. No accusation. No explanation. Just finality. What that sentence was, and why it mattered so deeply, would become the most quietly discussed detail of the entire festival. But at that moment, all anyone knew was this. Something had shifted. Meghan Markle didn't just walk away from that interaction without a phone number. She walked away having revealed something people at Sundance rarely forgive. And the people who noticed? They would remember. Because at Sundance, reputations aren't destroyed loudly. They're reshaped quietly. And this moment, witnessed, absorbed, and never officially acknowledged, was only the beginning. Because what people started saying after the interaction ended would travel much faster than anything that happened during it. And once those whispers began, there was no stopping what came next.